Thank you, Mr. Carroll. We've been joined by Supervisor Peskin. Thank you. I believe you might have some remarks or questions.
Thank you, Chair Mandelman, and I just want to start by thanking you for calling this hearing, and I want to note that I'm really pleased that supervisors have to cycle in and out. That is a sign that the board is engaged, and that is a good thing. And I want to say that I think Supervisor Ronan really got it right, which is that we all know that this is the most vexing issue in the city and county of San Francisco. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know what every poll tells us. We are all very frustrated about this. And we all, and some of you were not on the board, actually, I think almost every single one of you, other than Supervisor Ronan, was not on the board. Actually, it might have even been Supervisor Campos, when we all voted unanimously when Mayor Lee decided that we would consolidate the disparate, siloized functions around homelessness in one department. And I believe it was Supervisor Walton who said that our job is to hold that agency accountable. And interestingly enough, there was a moment in time when Supervisor Campos made a clarion call to ask every member of the Board of Supervisors and their constituents in all corners of this city to do their part. And it was kind of interesting because there were some supervisors who said they did not want to have homeless facilities, also known as navigation centers, in their district. And this is not about me, but I've actually been trying for 3 years, and Mr. Dodge is looking at me because he knows that I tried to get Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. He knows that I tried to get 88 Broadway, and by the way, that was inspired in large part, Supervisor Ronan, by what you showed at 1515 South Van Ness, which was that we could have temporary facilities. And so when you were able to do that for less than a year in time, I realized, and I said it in these chambers yesterday, and many of you were present when we were visiting with the Mayor's Office of Housing, we had a site, and I went to Mayor Lee, and Mayor Lee said, I support having a navigation center at that site, but you, Supervisor, have to sell this, if you will, get the support of your constituents. And we did that. And I was actually delighted that after a meeting that I believe Mr. Kositsky was at and Commander Lazar was at, wherein Public Works made a fantastic, thank you, Mr. Dodge, presentation, I was delighted that when I said at the end of that meeting with over 200 people in the room from Chinatown, from Russian Hill, from Telegraph Hill, from North Beach, from the Northeast Waterfront, do you want to have a navigation center in District 3? I think almost everybody but 4 people, Emily, you were there, raised their hands. And today, I still don't have that site because, and now it's time to hold people in the government accountable, because various government officials have gotten in the way of that. Okay? And I said that yesterday relative to the Mayor's Office of Housing that convinced themselves that they would be in the ground with an affordable housing project at 88 Broadway in September. We were informed yesterday that the earliest it could happen would be April. I could have had that for much longer than Supervisor Ronan had it at 1515 South Van Ness. Subsequently, we found another site owned actually not by the people of the city and county of San Francisco, owned by the people of the state of California, Portland, corner of Bay and Kearny. Port was willing to do it. I was willing to do it. We did the work. We took the merchants at Fisherman's Wharf, thank you, Ms. Cohen, on repeated tours. As a matter of fact, we have one today. We took the folks who were skeptical about it to the Dogpatch Navigation Center. And yet, the system, and yes, respectfully, Mr. Kositsky, I'm looking at you, and yes, I now know there's an alternative. Put the kibosh on that too. So interestingly enough, I took the pledge of I wanted a navigation center or a respite site or a shelter in the northeast corner of the city. But respectfully, the bureaucracy has actually made this not happen. When you have an elected official who is willing to stand up to his or her constituents to make it happen. So, as Mr. Walton said, it is time to hold our department heads accountable. So, to that end, Jeff, why have you resisted a site for homelessness in District 3?
Thank you, Jeff Kositsky, Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. And as we discussed yesterday evening, there were 3 sites that we looked at, one before my time, but I believe there were life safety issues at that site at the church. There was the second site at 88 Broadway, which, and as we discussed, one of the issues with navigation centers, and I think part of rolling these out responsibly and effectively, is when you have a site for short term that you're going to spend millions of dollars of capital to make that site come alive and serve people, and then you can only have it for a year or two, doesn't really make financial sense, but also it puts us on this hamster wheel of having to constantly open and close shelters, which take a tremendous amount of energy, money, and work. So we are looking for sites that are available longer term. And then the other issue that we're trying to be very sensitive to is the cost of operating navigation centers and the size that they need to be in order to make them cost effective. Currently, some of the small navigation center sites are costing us more than it does to operate permanent supportive housing per night. So we are looking at sites that can be large enough to be cost effective to run a 24/7 facility. And the site that we're talking about on Kearney Street did not meet those requirements. However, we are looking at a site, and also will supervisors say, I do appreciate your support on this. I appreciate the support that you gave at the meeting with many of your constituents we're at. We still would love to find a site that's appropriate and works in District 3, but we are looking at opening up, and I think very much so, it's very much needed in that part of the city, that corner of the city. It's not quite in your district, but we are looking for sites that can serve the northeastern part of the city and your district as well. So that is there certainly was no intent to be obstructive. We certainly want as many beds as we possibly can. The mayor has spoken repeatedly and frankly asks me about it multiple times a week, where we're at on opening up 1,000 more shelter beds. So we are open to any and all opportunities to do so, as long as it makes sense in terms of the investment that we have to make, the time we have to put into it, and that's going to best serve people who are experiencing homelessness.
I appreciate that. I also want to associate myself with the comments of Supervisor Brown, who raised some pretty radical ideas about using parks. And let me make some other suggestions, Commander Lazar. We have actually any number of facilities that are huge. We all heard the comments of our new governor relative to high-speed rail. We have a facility that is larger than several football fields called the Transbay Terminal. We have, and Senator Wiener just introduced a piece of legislation relative to the Cow Palace, which sits in part in this county and in part in San Mateo County. It is a huge facility. So if you want to do economies of scale, we have sites, right? Now, I've always thought that the navigation center model was that we wanted to put the sites where the people were, because we cannot take folks to where they don't want to go. But if we have facilities, and this is where I really part company with you, Jeff, which is if you go and create a facility that's far away from where folks are, they're not going to go there. And that's why, even though some of my constituents don't want it, I'm happy to have an 80-bed facility. And what really bums me out and pisses me off is the fact that we had a department of city government, and Mr. Dodge, you can come up and tell me how much money you spent and how much money Public Works spent designing a facility that other people in the government ultimately killed. I mean, if you want, I don't really care. But it's like, guys, gals, we got to get this together. I mean, you can't have one arm of government screwing another arm of government when we consolidated all of these disparate functions into one department. So I'm getting close. It's very rare that I get this frustrated and upset. But Jeff, I mean, you've got to, one way or another way, step up. And that takes me to the homeless point in time count.